The laughter around the table died the moment I set my phone down next to my plate. Sarah, the new girlfriend my brother-in-law had brought, the one who'd spent the last 20 minutes taking shots at me, went silent mid-smirk. My father-in-law, who had just finished telling me to stop making his family look bad, stared at my screen like he'd seen a ghost. My wife Jessica froze with her wine glass halfway to her lips. Brandon, my brother-in-law, looked like he'd bitten into something rotten. My name is Tyler Morrison. I'm 36 years old, and up until that Sunday dinner at my in-laws' house, I had honestly believed I'd married into a decent family. Snobbish, sure, but decent underneath it all. Jessica and I had been together for 8 years, married for 5. In that time, I'd bent myself into every shape imaginable trying to fit the Patterson family mold. They were old money Connecticut, Westport address, country club memberships, legacy college admissions, generational wealth that stretched back further than anyone cared to count. The kind of people who could say blue blood without a trace of irony and never let you forget that in their minds they were the standard by which everyone else should be measured. I grew up in Hartford, not the charming historic district they put on postcards, the part with triple-deckers stacked tight against each other and corner stores that sold everything from cereal to motor oil. My father drives trucks for a living. My mother works a register at Stop and Shop. Good people, hard workers, no trust funds waiting at the end of a phone call. But I built something anyway. At 28, I started my own logistics consulting firm with nothing but savings, stubborn determination, and a willingness to outwork everyone around me. By 32, we were pulling in multi-million-dollar annual revenue. Now I employ 47 people across 3 offices. My clients include national distributors and manufacturers whose names most people would recognize. The Pattersons knew all of this. They simply chose to act like none of it mattered. To them, I was still the kid from the wrong zip code who had somehow stumbled into their world, lucky, temporary, an outsider they tolerated because their daughter claimed to love me. That Sunday started like every other visit. Jessica and I pulled up to her parents' massive white colonial in Westport at 6 o'clock sharp. The place looked like it had been designed specifically to be photographed for architectural magazines. Manicured lawns stretching toward the street, stone walkway perfectly aligned, hedges trimmed with surgical precision. Every detail screamed money, taste, and the quiet confidence of people who had never wondered whether they belonged anywhere. Her father, Richard Patterson, owned a chain of car dealerships scattered across Connecticut, the kind that ran commercials during football games, his face plastered on billboards along the interstate. Her mother, Victoria, was a professional socialite who spent her days on charity boards and fundraising committees, attending galas where people casually dropped $10,000 on paintings they didn't even like. Brandon, Jessica's younger brother, was already there when we arrived. He was 29, worked in sales at one of Richard's dealerships, and cycled through girlfriends like he was trying on shoes. Every time we came for dinner, there was a new woman on his arm and a new, serious relationship being announced. That evening's addition was Sarah Kingsley, 26 years old, worked in marketing, according to Victoria's introduction as we entered the dining room. Sarah had the kind of polished, curated look that didn't happen by accident. Straight blonde hair that had clearly been flat-ironed into submission. Makeup so subtle it had probably taken an hour to achieve. A designer dress that whispered expensive with every movement, and a level of confidence that only came from a lifetime of doors swinging open before you ever reached for the handle. "Tyler," Victoria said, gesturing between us as we found our seats. "Sarah works for Ashton and Pierce, you know, the marketing firm downtown." I nodded politely. "Nice to meet you, Sarah." She gave me a smile that looked right but felt hollow. "You too. Brandon's told me so much about his family." Everyone settled into their usual positions around the table. The next 20 minutes unfolded like every other Patterson dinner. Predictable, self-congratulatory, exhausting. Richard recited weekly sales numbers from the dealerships as though he were presenting to a board of directors. Victoria discussed an upcoming charity auction, dropping donor names like they were celebrities everyone should recognize. Brandon bragged about closing a sale, some customer who'd bought an SUV with all the premium add-ons. Jessica talked about her interior design projects, the safe, neutral territory she always retreated to. No one asked about my week, no one mentioned my business. That was normal. After 8 years, I'd learned that unless I was fixing something or paying for something, I essentially didn't exist at their table. Then Sarah turned her attention toward me. "So, Tyler," she said, slicing her salmon into precise, tiny bites, "Jessica mentioned you run some kind of consulting thing." "I do. Logistics consulting. We help companies optimize their supply chains and distribution networks." She nodded slowly, wearing the expression of someone being explained the rules to a game they had no intention of ever playing. "Ha, so you tell truck drivers where to go." Brandon snorted into his wine. Jessica shot me an apologetic glance but stayed quiet. "Not exactly," I replied, keeping my voice even. "We analyze entire logistics operations, warehousing, routing, transportation, inventory management. We use data modeling and strategic planning to reduce costs and improve efficiency. It's fairly complex work." Sarah took a delicate sip of wine, her lips curling slightly at the corners. Right, my mistake. So you're basically a middle manager for trucks." Richard chuckled. Victoria smiled into her glass like she was watching something amusing. Jessica stared at her plate as though she wanted to disappear into it. The familiar tightness began spreading through my chest, the sensation that arrived every time they reminded me I wasn't really one of them. Over the years, I'd learned to swallow it. Arguing back never helped. It only transformed me into the problem. "Something like that," I said, quietly. And that was my mistake. The moment I downplayed myself, Sarah smelled blood in the water. "Brandon tells me you grew up in Hartford," she continued, and her voice had shifted, lighter on the surface but sharper underneath. "That must have been interesting. I've driven through there a few times. Not exactly the nicest area." "It wasn't bad. Good people, strong community." "Oh, I'm sure," she replied, dripping with manufactured sympathy. "Everyone's doing the best they can with what they have, right? I mean, not everyone can afford private schools and summers in the Hamptons. That's the beauty of America. People from all backgrounds can still succeed." The table went quiet in that particular way where everyone hears the insult but pretends they don't hear it. "Tyler's done very well for himself," Jessica offered finally, though her voice barely rose above a murmur. "Oh, absolutely," Sarah said quickly. "To go from that kind of background to running your own little business, that's the American dream, isn't it? Very impressive." Little business. The phrase hung between us like smoke. I glanced around the table. Richard had become intensely focused on cutting his steak. Victoria was refilling her wine as though it was her sole purpose in life. Brandon's lips twitched as he fought back laughter. And Jessica, my wife, my partner, the woman who had promised to stand beside me, sat in perfect silence while a stranger belittled everything I'd built. "Maybe we should talk about something else," I said, still maintaining my composure. "Why?" She tilted her head, eyes wide with practiced innocence. "I think it's fascinating. I love hearing success stories from people who overcome adversity. It's so inspiring." She wasn't even pretending anymore. Every sentence was another reminder. "You're not us. You don't belong here. You should be grateful we even let you through the door." "Sarah's right," Brandon chimed in, grinning. "Tyler's come a long way. Remember when we first met him, Dad? He was driving that old Honda with the dented door." Richard actually smiled at that. "I do remember. What year was that car? 95? 96? 97. "Still running?" Sarah asked sweetly. "Sold it years ago," I replied. "That's good. Once you start making real money, you can upgrade those things." Real money, as though the 7-figure income I'd earned last year was play currency. Victoria decided to contribute to the entertainment. "Tyler has always been very practical with money, very careful. I suppose that comes from growing up with limited resources." My jaw tightened. 8 years of this. Little digs disguised as observations, backhanded compliments, jokes that all pointed in the same direction. "You're beneath us. Don't forget it." "You know what I find truly admirable?" Sarah continued, and I knew whatever followed would be worse. "People who work with their hands, real blue-collar jobs. Like your father, he was a truck driver, right?" "Was. Is a truck driver.
He's not dead." She laughed lightly. "Right, sorry, is a truck driver. That's such honest work. My father always says we need people willing to do those kinds of jobs. Someone has to, right?" Brandon was openly laughing now. Jessica's eyes glistened, but her mouth remained sealed shut. Richard and Victoria watched the performance unfold like it had been arranged for their amusement. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady but carrying more edge, "I think you're being disrespectful." "Disrespectful?" She actually managed to look offended. "I'm complimenting you. I'm saying I admire people who come from nothing and make something of themselves. How is that disrespectful?"
Richard stepped in to defend her. "Tyler, I think you're being a bit sensitive. Sarah's just making conversation." "She's insulting my family and my background," I said. "No one's insulting anyone," Victoria replied, her tone frigid. "You're making this awkward for everyone." I turned to Jessica, silently pleading. "Say something, anything. Back me up. Acknowledge what's happening right in front of you." Nothing. She just stared at her plate like a child waiting for the storm to pass. "Maybe you should relax," Brandon added. "Sarah didn't mean anything by it. You're kind of overreacting." "I'm overreacting?" I asked. "Yes," Richard said flatly. "You're making my family look bad by turning simple conversation into drama. Sarah is a guest in our home, and you're making her uncomfortable." I looked at my father-in-law, the man who had never once asked about my business, never congratulated me on a single milestone, never treated me as anything close to an equal, and finally understood that he would always see me as the problem. "I apologize," I said, after a long, measured pause. "I didn't mean to make anyone uncomfortable." Sarah's smile widened by a fraction. "No worries," she said. "I understand. Sometimes people get defensive about where they come from. It's natural." And just like that, the spotlight shifted away from me. Sarah launched into a monologue about her position at Ashton and Pierce, the major clients they handled, the significant campaigns she was supposedly driving. Brandon hung on every word like she was revealing secrets of the universe. Victoria peppered her with admiring questions. Richard nodded with approval. And somewhere in the middle of her performance, something inside me finally clicked into place. While they listened to her inflate her own importance, I unlocked my phone beneath the table. I typed Ashton and Pierce Marketing into the search bar, pulled up their website, client list, case studies, recent press releases. Then I searched for Sarah Kingsley and found her LinkedIn profile, cross-referenced it with the company directory. I waited until she was deep in the middle of explaining some major account she claimed to be managing. "Sarah," I said, cutting in smoothly, "how long did you say you've been with Ashton and Pierce?" She brightened at the attention. "About 8 months now. I started as a senior marketing associate, but they're already considering me for an account manager position." "That's fast," I said. "And you mentioned working with their major clients?" "I do. I mean, we operate collaboratively, but yes, I'm on the significant accounts." "Which clients specifically?" I asked. She paused for just a breath. "Well, I can't share names because of confidentiality agreements, obviously," she said. "But trust me, they're recognizable brands." I nodded slowly. "Right, confidentiality, that makes sense." Brandon bristled. "Why are you interrogating her? She just explained." "I'm simply curious about Sarah's work," I said calmly, "since she was so interested in mine earlier." Sarah's smile had grown tighter around the edges. "It's fine, Brandon. Tyler's just making conversation." "You know what's actually funny?" I said, placing my phone face up on the table. "I have some connection to Ashton and Pierce myself." The atmosphere in the room shifted. "Really?" Sarah's voice had become more guarded. "About 6 months ago, my company was exploring a rebrand. We needed a firm that genuinely understood B2B logistics. We sent requests for proposals to several agencies in the area. I tapped my phone screen. Ashton and Pierce was one of them. We ultimately went with a different firm, but that process made me very familiar with their operation, their structure, their typical client profile, their team organization. Richard was watching me intently now. Victoria's fork hovered motionless above her plate. And right now, I continued, glancing at my screen, I'm looking at their public client list. Those major brands you mentioned, they're mostly local businesses, a couple of regional restaurant chains, some retail boutiques, a few dental practices. Solid work, certainly, but let's not pretend we're discussing Fortune 500 companies. I never claimed they were Fortune 500, Sarah said quickly. No, I agree, you didn't. You just implied it. I looked at Brandon. And that account manager promotion you mentioned? That's interesting, because I happen to know someone at Ashton and Pierce. Jake Palmer. He's a creative director there. I opened my messages and slid my phone closer to the center of the table. While you were talking, I said, I texted him and asked if they had anyone named Sarah Kingsley on staff. The silence was absolute. He confirmed they do, I continued, but she's not a senior marketing associate. I let the words settle before finishing. She's a junior coordinator. Entry level. She was part of the support pool, managing calls, managing calendars, booking conference rooms, occasionally helping assemble slide decks when someone needed them in a hurry. Not exactly the power player she'd been portraying. I watched the color drain from Sarah's face, then flood back in a bright, blotchy red. And just so everyone's clear, I added, there's no account manager promotion being discussed. There's no major client team she's leading. According to Jake, she's the one making copies and ordering lunch for those meetings, not running them. Tyler, Jessica started. Wait, I said, keeping my focus on Sarah. I'm not finished. I leaned forward slightly. You've spent the last 20 minutes attacking my childhood, my parents, and my work. You called my company a little business. You implied I'm essentially middle management for truck drivers. You spoke about me like I was some charity case who got lucky. I opened my browser and pulled up my company's website, then turned the phone so everyone could see. This is Morrison Logistics Consulting. Last year, we generated just over $8 million in revenue. I employ 47 people. Our client roster includes 3 Fortune 500 companies and 7 major regional distributors. I swiped to an internal report and tapped the screen. Last month, we signed a national retail chain to a multi-year consulting agreement. That single contract will generate over $2 million in fees across its term. Then I looked directly at Richard. That's more than your top-performing dealership clears in a year, Richard. His face shifted from red to something approaching purple. And you, I said, turning back to Sarah, while you were sneering at my father for driving a truck and my mother for working a register, you conveniently left out a few details about yourself. I pulled up the salary information Jake had sent for junior coordinators at her firm. You're making around $42,000 a year answering phones and scheduling other people's meetings. That's less than I pay my newest junior analyst, fresh out of college, first real job. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the antique clock ticking in the hallway. Forks hovered over plates. No one moved. You don't know anything about me, Sarah managed finally, her voice trembling. I know you lied, I said calmly. I know you sat here pretending you're higher on the ladder than you actually are, while mocking someone who actually built something from nothing. And I know everyone at this table watched you do it and felt perfectly comfortable because it gave all of you a chance to feel superior to the kid from Hartford. Brandon shoved his chair back and stood. You can't talk to her like that. Sit down, Brandon, I said, without looking at him. I'm talking to your father. I turned to Richard. You told me I was making your family look bad. You accused me of overreacting. You watched a complete stranger insult me, insult my parents, and belittle my work. And you did nothing. Actually, worse than nothing. You encouraged it.
Tyler, I think you should leave, Victoria said, her voice like ice. I agree, I said, and I will, but first I'm going to make something very clear. I rose slowly from my chair and looked around the table, at each face I'd spent 8 years trying to win over. For nearly a decade, I've tolerated your condescension, the little digs, the jokes about my old car, my clothes, my neighborhood, the compliments that were really just reminders that I was lucky to be sitting at this table. I turned to Jessica. And you have never once defended me, not a single time. You've sat through every one of these dinners and watched them treat me like I was beneath you, like I should be grateful you married down. Tyler, please, Jessica whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. I'm done, I said. I'm done pretending this is normal. I'm done letting people who've accomplished less than I have act like they're royalty while I play the help. And I am especially done listening to an entry-level receptionist trash my parents while the rest of you nod along like it's entertainment. Sarah was openly crying now. Victoria was on her feet, radiating fury. Richard looked ready to combust. Brandon stood half out of his chair, fists clenched like he wanted to swing at me. I didn't care anymore. Jessica, I said quietly, you have a choice to make. Right now. You can stay here with your family, where they get to keep treating me like garbage, or you can walk out that door with me and we can build something better, something that's actually ours. Every eye at the table moved to her. Jessica broke completely. Tears streamed down her face, smearing her mascara. She looked at me, then at her parents, then back at me. Tyler, you can't just... Yes or no, I said. Right now. The moment stretched into something heavy and irreversible. I watched the woman I'd loved for 8 years, the woman I'd imagined building a future with, struggle with the simplest possible question. Stand with your husband, or stand with the people tearing him down. Tyler, they're my family, she said finally. That's my answer, I said. I pushed my chair back, walked out of the dining room, and didn't look over my shoulder. Not when Victoria called my name, not when I heard Jessica sobbing, not when Brandon shouted something about how I'd ruined everything. I got into my car, the BMW I'd purchased with cash from years of my own hard work, and drove back to our apartment. The rent, the furniture, the security deposit, the upgrades, every bit of it had been covered by me. That night, while I sat on the couch with a glass of the expensive scotch the Pattersons had given me a couple of Christmases before, my phone buzzed. A message from Jake at Ashton and Pierce. He wanted to know what had happened. Apparently, Sarah had just been fired. Her boss discovered she'd been lying about her role to everyone, her boyfriend, his family, mutual friends, all of it. My text had blown the lid off. I stared at the message for a moment, then set my phone aside without replying. I wasn't interested in her fallout. I was still thinking about that exact second at the dinner table when their smug expressions had vanished, when it finally registered for them that the truck driver's son from Hartford wasn't someone they could look down on anymore. Jessica came home around midnight. Her eyes were swollen, her makeup ruined. She dropped her bag by the door, sat across from me, and stared at the floor for a long time before speaking. You humiliated Sarah, she said finally. Sarah humiliated herself, I replied. She lost her job because of you. She lost her job because she lied about who she was and got caught. That's entirely on her. She shook her head slowly. My family thinks you're a monster. Your family has always thought I was beneath them. The only difference now is that I finally stopped pretending not to notice. Tyler, they're my parents, my brother. I can't just cut them off. I'm not asking you to cut them off. I'm asking you to stand up for me when they treat me like garbage. I'm asking you to be on my side, just once, in 8 years. She went quiet. The silence felt heavier than anything that had happened at dinner. I don't know if I can do that, she said eventually. That was it. The answer I hadn't wanted but already knew was coming.
In that moment, I understood our marriage wasn't wounded. It was finished. We separated 3 weeks later. She moved back in with her parents temporarily. 2 months after that, the divorce papers arrived. She wanted the apartment, half of my business equity, and spousal support. I let the apartment go. I was tired of living in a place she chose, surrounded by furniture meant to impress her parents. But the business? That I fought for, hard. Jessica had never worked a single hour for my company, never helped with a proposal, never attended a meeting, never even asked meaningful questions about what I did unless she needed something to mention at a party. My lawyers laid out the documentation. The judge agreed. She didn't get a piece of what I'd built. Richard tried to play the intimidating patriarch during the process. He hinted about his connections, talked about dragging things out, implied he'd bury me under legal fees. But here's the difference between acting like you have power and actually having it. I had money, documentation, and excellent attorneys. He had bluster. In the end, the settlement was considerably less generous than Jessica had hoped. She received what the law required, and not much beyond that. Brandon and Sarah didn't last long after that Sunday either. Within 2 weeks, they were finished. Once everyone knew she'd been lying about her position, she apparently wasn't impressive enough for him anymore. She moved back in with her parents, eventually took a new role at another agency. From what I heard, she was honest this time about being entry-level. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned she'd even apologized to Jessica for that night. Not to me, of course, but at least she had acknowledged being out of line. The Pattersons cut me off completely once the divorce was finalized. No calls, no texts, no awkward encounters. I was entirely fine with that. There was nothing left to discuss.
About 6 months later, something happened that made all of it feel strangely worthwhile. I was having dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown with a potential business partner. White tablecloths, soft lighting, waitstaff that seemed to glide rather than walk. Exactly the kind of establishment the Pattersons loved to frequent. Across from me sat James Morrison, CEO of Morrison Distribution Corporation, one of the largest logistics operations in the Northeast. Same last name as mine, not a coincidence. James is my uncle, my father's older brother, the successful side of the family the Pattersons had never bothered asking about because, in their minds, truck driver told them everything they needed to know. My father drove trucks for a living. His brother owned the company that employed those drivers, plus several other operations besides. Uncle James had just agreed to make a significant investment in my firm to help us expand into new markets. We were in the middle of mapping out a growth strategy when I noticed movement over James's shoulder. Richard and Victoria Patterson were being seated 3 tables away. We made eye contact at almost the same instant. For half a second, Richard looked like he might march over and cause a scene. Then his gaze shifted to my uncle. Recognition flickered across his face. You don't run car dealerships in Connecticut without knowing who controls a significant portion of the region's freight. I watched him piece it together. The son of the nobody truck driver was having dinner with the man who owned the trucking company, and that man was speaking to me like a partner, not a subordinate. Uncle James noticed Richard staring and leaned toward me. "You know them?" he asked. "That's my former father-in-law," I said quietly, "the one who thought he was too good for my family." James glanced over, then smirked. "Him? I've actually been keeping an eye on his dealerships. Wouldn't mind picking them up if they ever hit the market. Want me to go introduce myself? Give him something to think about?" I pictured it. My uncle strolling over, casually mentioning he was considering acquiring Patterson's dealerships, the expression on Richard's face. For a moment, I was genuinely tempted. Then I remembered that dinner table, Jessica's silence, Sarah's tears, my own anger, and the feeling when I walked out of that house and could finally breathe again. I shook my head. "No," I said. "Let's just enjoy our meal. He's not worth the time." We finished dinner, talked strategy and expansion, not revenge. On my way out, I walked past the Pattersons' table and paused briefly. "Evening, Richard, Victoria," I said pleasantly. "Hope you're enjoying your meal." Richard's jaw was clenched so tight it looked painful. Victoria stared determinedly at her plate. "The food here is excellent.
Uncle James and I come here whenever we're discussing something significant. He's considering expanding his operations further into Connecticut. Maybe I'll mention your dealerships to him, maybe an interesting acquisition target." I offered a professional smile. "Have a good night," I said, and walked away. I didn't need revenge. I already had what mattered, my life back entirely on my own terms. That encounter was 3 years ago. Since then, Morrison Logistics Consulting has tripled in size. We opened offices in Boston and Providence. We secured contracts with 2 Fortune 100 companies. Last year, our revenue crossed $26 million. I bought a house on the water in Madison. It's beautiful, quiet, open, everything I never knew I wanted growing up in a cramped apartment. It's nicer than the Patterson's Colonial, but that's not why I bought it. I bought it because I earned it, and it felt like home. Through people who still communicate with both sides, I heard that Jessica remarried, a finance guy. I genuinely hope she's happy, but I also hope she learned something important. I hope she learned that watching silently while your spouse is disrespected isn't keeping the peace, it's betrayal. I hope she learned that where someone starts in life has nothing to do with their actual value. And I hope she eventually understood that sometimes the person everyone assumes is lucky to be at the table is actually the one bringing the most to it. As for Sarah, I ran into her at a networking event about a year ago. She was working for a small startup by then, doing genuine marketing work, managing minor campaigns, clearly several steps beyond where she'd been. The polished arrogance she'd worn at that dinner had mostly disappeared. She spotted me across the room, and I could practically see the internal debate, approach and address it, or pretend we'd never met. Eventually, she took a breath and walked over. "Tyler," she said, "I owe you an apology." "I do," I agreed. "You were terrible to me that night. I was trying to impress Brandon and his family. I was insecure about my own position, and I lashed out at you instead. I crossed too many lines. I'm sorry." I studied her for a moment. She looked different, more grounded, less performative. People don't always change, but occasionally they do. "Apology accepted," I said, and I meant it. "But, Sarah, what you did that night wasn't just going too far. It revealed who you were willing to become when you wanted approval. You were comfortable tearing someone else down to make yourself appear bigger. That's not merely bad behavior. That's character." She nodded slowly. "I know. I've been working on that. Therapy, a lot of reflection. I'm trying to be better." "I hope you succeed, truly." Then I excused myself and walked away. Because here's something worth understanding. Some people deserve second chances at building better lives, but that doesn't mean you're obligated to be part of their redemption arc. Looking back now, I realized that dinner was the best thing that could have happened to me. It forced me to stop lying to myself. For 8 years, I'd convinced myself the Pattersons would eventually accept me, that if I just kept my head down and remained polite, they'd come around. They were never going to. That night showed me I'd married into a family that would never respect me, and into a marriage where my wife wouldn't defend me when it genuinely mattered. Leaving hurt, losing the marriage hurt, but it freed me to build the life I actually wanted, rather than the life I thought I was supposed to want to impress other people. A few months ago, my parents came to visit the new house. My mom walked through every room, pointing at details, countertops, light fixtures, the view of the water, tearing up every few minutes. My dad stood on the back deck, staring at Long Island Seam like he was watching something he'd never expected to see. "Never imagined a kid from our neighborhood would end up with a place like this," he said quietly. "You and Mom raised me right," I told him. "You taught me that honest work and treating people with respect matter more than bank accounts or zip codes." He put a hand on my shoulder and smiled. "Your mother and I are proud of you, Tyler, not for the house or the money, for never letting anyone make you feel like you're less than they are. That's what counts. And that, ultimately, is the point of everything." The real victory wasn't the revenue numbers or the new offices or the waterfront property. It was this. I stopped allowing people to treat me as less than I knew myself to be. The Pattersons taught me a lesson they never intended. Sometimes you have to demand respect. Being patient, being accommodating, hoping people will eventually recognize your worth, none of that works when they've already decided you're beneath them. Sometimes you have to calmly demonstrate exactly who you are and what you've built, and then walk away from anyone who still refuses to see it. That Sunday dinner cost me my marriage and whatever relationship I'd attempted to build with my in-laws. But it gave me back my self-respect. And that trade, I would make it again without hesitation.